Welcome to our first opinions of Swords of Legends Online. Just to clarify, this is not going to be our usual commentary style first opinions. We're going to be doing a free-flow conversation, and I'll throw some footage up of the beta just, for something to have a video component.
Yeah.
So this first opinions is also a little different because unlike our usual ones where one of us has played it and is guiding the rest of us through, all three of us have had a chance to play the closed beta for Swords of Legends Online. This is an MMO that came out in China in July 2019, and numbers-wise is one of the biggest MMOs, if not the biggest MMO in China. It is finally getting localized stateside, and it is going to be, from what we gathered, a buy-to-play. So pay for the box, no monthly fee after that.
That does actually change some things in my mind, but go ahead, continue.
I guess that's kind of the layout. So why don't we start with just real quick, what class you played and how far you got?
Sure. I started playing as a Reaper, which I did mention on our podcast the other day, but the idea with the Reaper is that you use a big scythe, and you can either go into almost like a stealth version or into an occultist version, which is kind of like a support healer role.
Okay.
And I got to level 9. I was a little disappointed I didn't get to 10, but that's okay. I think I got enough of the game to really understand their progression system and the feel of the class and things like that. So, what about yourself, Alex?
I played the Spell Sword, which it describes it as it's a mix of melee sword things and caster stuff. So I was kind of thinking like Red Mage from Final Fantasy XIV, where you do go back and forth between range and melee on a constant basis. What it actually feels more like, though, is almost more like a hunter. Okay. Because without a pet. Because basically all I'm doing is throwing swords at guys.
It did kind of look like that when I looked at the character creation screen. I was like, those swords are all just floating.
Yeah, so basically there's 3 components to it. Okay. So you have the swords that you throw out that are like a energy builder, effectively.
Yep.
That restore your mana. I'll just use mana as a generalized thing.
Sure.
Because your mana normally restores at a certain rate. Actually, it's more like a rogue's energy in WoW.
Okay.
So it restores, and that helps it restore faster. So that's like your auto attack, basically. Then you have a spender, which is basically just a more powerful sword with piercing, from what I could tell. And it basically has the same effect as the builder. They're both sort of straight line sword attacks.
Okay.
And it builds, or it spends, and then there's another attack that builds up a combo point system, basically.
Okay.
And then there's the combo point spender. And that's basically what I had at the moment. It's not... It doesn't feel quite as smooth as what I think a lot of people are used to with builders and spenders and combo point system. But it feels perfectly fine, I guess. It could be better, but again, I only was at level 10, so I only had 6 abilities at the time.
I guess
so. I could see them adding different types of spenders and stuff. And the spender, which once you have 5 swords built up, you basically hold onto a charge, and every half second, I think it is, of the charge, another sword gets added to your attack. And once you've built up as many swords as you want, it spends those amount of swords, and it does damage in AoE.
Okay. So I guess I'll just add a little bit more to mine, since Alex would talk a little bit more in depth about the combat system for his class. So mine wasn't that different. I had my basic scythe attacks, which would build an energy system, kind of like energy again, called Edge. Yeah. And then I had a spender, which was straight line magic attacks. But I also had a couple of smaller abilities. So I had a dot that I could apply, and I had a kind of a super move that it built up damage over time based on how much I've done to the enemy. And then when I used the ability, it would take all the damage that I had done and turn it into a one hit, right? So it was really good for a big finisher after doing a big combo, right? And I could also go invisible, which was part of the stealth mechanic, right? But that all required edge. If I didn't have edge, I couldn't do that. There was also a bit of a combo point system, although it had like 10 or 15 points instead of only 5. And I could build it up just with any moves that I used, whether it was builder or spender, it would build up that point system. And I did have one spender, which was, again, a nice, really big finisher move, which would use about 5 points of what was available, right? And just do like a really big hit.
Yeah, 2 other abilities I had was also a stun, and I had like a blink, basically like a short-range teleport. But yeah, that was kind of what I had so far.
Alright, so I played a Spearmaster. I got to level 11. And it sounds like all of the classes might have a similar mechanic, because mine was called Rage.
Okay.
But it functioned much like a rogue's energy system in WoW, where you have builders and spenders. There's really not much to go into detail here. Like, it's a Spearmaster, so a lot of it was like sweeping attacks.
Sure. With
a bit more of a wide arch.
Yeah.
But it really does sound like the combat is
they took
mechanically the same for all of them. One thing I do want to ask, did you guys feel like maybe the time to kill was a little high?
For some things, yeah. There was when I fought like I won't say elite mobs, but like bigger mobs, it seemed to I would just hammer on that thing forever. But then some of the smaller mobs, especially at the early stage where it was just little guys, I found that I was like maybe 2-shotting them. They would just fall over.
See, even regular, normal enemies that I came across, I'd have to hit so many times. Now, the thing is, my character had, at the point that I was at, 2 cooldown abilities. One was a knockdown, and one was just an attack that changed my builder into a different kind of attack.
Okay.
And if I used one of the cooldowns, which was about 30 seconds on each of them, 20, 30 seconds... the attacks, like if I hit somebody that was on the ground from the knockdown, they would take huge damage, and I could like 2-shot them. If I used the ability that turned my basic builder into a different kind of attack, all of a sudden I would see their energy just, like their health just depleting.
I wonder if that was kind of like built into the mechanic for your class, right? Like kind of going back to what I had with that big spender that I had. Doing like a load of damage, I had to maintain my dot to try and like do more damage. Like if I didn't maintain my dot and it fell off, I found that the damage from that big ability would do like nothing. But if I maintained my dot for a good like 10, 15 seconds, it would just like do a huge amount of damage and almost one-shot even a big guy.
Yeah, but like my builders do basically no damage. If I were to try to just kill something with auto attacks, it would take forever. Even the small enemies would take a while. So I was mainly like gathering up a bunch of enemies, sort of building up my combo points,
and then using your big AoE,
and then using either the big AoE or the one of the abilities I had, which builds up the swords, is actually also does a lot of damage. It's kind of like a 2-tiered combo builder, basically. So I would use those two in combination, and anything would just die instantly. But yeah, like it does feel like the damage is very
negligible
end base, like off the end of the combos.
Sure.
Whereas up until then it's like nothing.
Like it was like a build up, but then suddenly at the end you're like boom and do a bunch. Yeah.
Whereas for me, if I managed my cooldowns, it would be right away.
Yeah, yeah.
Or if I didn't have the cooldowns, I would just be hitting them and like barely anything would be happening.
Yeah.
So beyond the basic mechanics of the different classes, what did you guys think of the combat, like just as a whole?
I mean, it felt okay. I did like the idea that I could kind of like move an attack and still like hit things pretty well. So like if I had a couple of enemies and I kind of like moved around between them, I was still hitting both. It wasn't like I had to like focus on one or anything like that. The difficulty I found was it just kind of felt a little bit loose on the controls, right? Compared to some of the other games, I felt it was a little bit floaty.
Yeah, I was actually going to say something similar. Like the combat feels very similar to Black Desert Online's combat, but Black Desert Online, the characters have like weight behind all their attacks, and you can really feel the difference between certain attacks that are meant to have more weight, but even between different classes. Like The Kunoichi, which is like the ninja, has very little weight to her attacks and has a lot of movement. Whereas if you're playing the much tankier Guardian, there's a lot of weight to like everything you're doing, basically. But in this case, it did feel like the movement almost was a little detached from the combat.
Yeah.
And the combat system didn't feel like it had... It felt like it had adequate flow, but it just didn't hit that same level that you get from something like BDO or WoW, which I think are sort of the top end when it comes to like combat flow for the tab targeting for WoW and for the more like this combat system for BDO.
Yeah, I did like that they went with the more, I guess, move based though, as opposed to like target based, because the like arcs of like enemies' attacks and stuff like that were telegraphed, so it was nice to be able to like maneuver around them, not to get hit. I actually found that there was plenty of times where I was pulling mobs and I just wasn't getting hit because I was avoiding their attacks.
Yeah, I did not find out where the stamina meter is, like for dodging, because you can dodge I think once, and then you're out of like stamina. But I didn't find where there's like a timer, where there's a bar. Like
I saw a little, almost like
a little circle,
little circle, yeah. And it would like when you hit it, the symbol would appear, but then you'd see it kind of like go like this and build up. So when it was full again, you could dodge again. So that's the way I noticed it.
I definitely felt like it wasn't the best UI for like showing some of the most relevant
It was a little busy.
information.
It was a little busy.
Like I would have expected like your health, mana, combo points. We're in pretty much the right space, but I would have expected like an energy bar there and an experience bar somewhere around there. I also never found out where the experience bar was.
I never found the experience bar either.
Yeah,
Did you see that at all, Sandra?
It's on the very bottom of the screen, my friend.
Really? Okay.
Never saw it.
I just never found it.
Runs across the entire bottom of the screen.
Must have been really thin.
It's thin, but it's there.
Okay.
And it did take me a little bit to spot it. Okay, well, what element do you guys want to talk about next?
I guess we could talk about...
There's localization, graphics, character creator,
Might as well talk about the character creator.
That's early in the game.
That's
You see that right
the
away.
first thing you see when you boot up the beta.
So,
I'm not a fan.
like initially when I first saw it, I thought like, oh, this is kind of like the BDO character creator. And BDO has a fantastic character creator, so much customization. This one felt like they were trying to go for that, and they got sort of like the basic core package for their character creator, and then they never added anything. It is so basic. Like, it's almost like if they took the BDO character creator, but they limited it with like the WoW amount of customization. Like,
it was very limited compared to what kind of we're used to for a newer MMO, right? Like older MMOs, I kind of expect that where it's like, okay, you can click through like 10 or 15 options, and that's what this kind of felt like. It had a little bit more because there were some scalars you could move around, but like it just didn't feel like it made enough of a difference.
Even the scalars felt very limited compared to.
Yeah.
Again, I'm probably going to just keep comparing it to BDO since it does feel like it's the most similar one.
Sure.
It felt very limited, even what you could scale. There were less things that you could even scale at all. Like there's only like a couple. It's almost more like rather than scaling individual parts, it was like you can scale this general area.
Yeah.
The face scaling was a bit more, but it's still kind of limited. Like it, and then things like hair, there's not too many choices, and there's basically only one color.
Yeah, the
You only
colors,
have
there was
dark hair.
very little difference between the
But-
colors.
I don't know if I should leave this for like talking about the store later. There are additional hair colors; they just aren't at launch or aren't in the character creator. So maybe that's why there's so many.
They wanted to
limitations.
limit the customizations to allow them to get a little bit more monetization out of selling them.
So
It's a possibility, yeah.
I don't think it's a great character creator. I'm generally not that impressed by it. Like, I didn't really feel like I could make a character that I wanted to make.
I definitely couldn't.
Yeah.
I like to make guys that have bald heads, big beards. That was not an option.
Yeah.
Like, bald wasn't a hair option.
Yeah.
And the only thing you could do for beards was little scruffs and morning, like afternoon shadows and stuff like that. And it's not at all what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I don't say this in any way as a negative thing or anything like that. But with a lot of character creators, you feel like you can make a diversity of characters from different looks and styles. Everything that I did in this made a character that kind of looked Asian.
Yeah.
Right? Which makes sense that it's a Chinese MMO, but like you boot up most other games, you can make an African American, you can make a Caucasian. Even here, if you change the skin color, it just looks like an Asian with a different skin color, no matter how many eye sliders or whatever. And again, that's not a bad thing. Like
it was originally made for that audience, right? So I guess
I mean, a lot of MMOs are originally made for a certain audience,
Yeah.
and they still have options.
Yeah.
And the character that I ended up making looked pretty good, right? But I ended up making a female because the male character options were just nowhere what I wanted them to be.
Yeah.
And it just looks like a very beautiful Asian girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel like something like bald should just be a staple option in all MMOs. Like, that's just such a basic thing. And I wouldn't even think it would be a hard thing to do. You just don't have, like, a hair mesh on top, right?
Yeah.
And then beards, yeah, like, I'd expect more beards for sure. But, yeah, I wasn't impressed by it.
It certainly was limited. Like, there's so many times where I'm like, man, there's not enough color options. There's not enough, hair options or additions that I could pick. I was even going through, because I decided to make a female character, and I wanted to go for almost like the darker lip gloss style, and it just was not there. There was like 17 shades of red, but then there was like brown, and that was it. And I was like, you can't give me some other colors? Like, it's just red.
Like I said, I ended up making a very nice looking female Asian looking character, and that's perfectly fine. But I made that because I was almost like forced into it by lack of choice, versus that's what I set out to make. So character creator, I'm not giving it like a big thumbs up or anything like that.
No.
It's not terrible because the characters still come out looking nice, but the illusion of choice is just that. It's an illusion in that character creator.
Yeah, it's very, very limited for sure. Any other thoughts to add?
I don't really have anything more to add to it. It really does stand out as something that might have been okay a decade ago, but just doesn't feel like it now.
Okay, so after you make your character, you enter the world proper, and I guess this might be a good time to talk about the graphics, because including the character creator and everything moving forward now, you are looking at the graphics. So what did you guys think of the visual presentation in the game?
I found it to be very inconsistent. There were times when I was looking at some of the the world itself, right? And I was like, man, that actually looks really good. And then there were other times and I was just like, wait, it was almost like the veil gets peeled back and I'm like, this looks like it belongs in like a PS2. It was kind of boxy in some places where
the first time was I experienced that? Is when you're going through that tutorial, and the first time you have to face some undead.
Yes.
The undead look like they're missing textures and look very previous gen. Up until then, you're fighting some spirits and some wildlife, and they do look pretty good. Like you're fighting a tiger, and the textures look nice on the fur and stuff like that. And then you fight an undead who's missing all detail.
Yeah.
And there's a big inconsistency. But the ceiling on the stuff that they do well does look pretty nice.
There were I think the best thing they did was actually After Effects. So things like the spell effects, the misty stuff that was going on, the smoke, that actually looked really good. And then it was just some of the textures they chose, even some of the character textures. It looked off, and it didn't quite match. There were so many times when I was looking at background compared to character, I'm like, it just doesn't work together,
I assume you're running it on pretty high settings?
I was running it on pretty high settings, yeah. I mean, I did find it to be a little bit laggy, and I would have liked to try it at a bit of higher settings to see if maybe it made more of a difference.
See, I had it on the highest settings, and it ran perfectly fine, except for when I was trying to capture, which did give me a little bit of a drop in frame rate, but that's to be expected because I'm video capturing.
Yeah.
When I wasn't, it ran smoothly and beautifully. Now, Alex, I'm interested to hear from you because you don't have as powerful of a rig, and I'm assuming you had to compromise some visual settings?
Yeah, my visual settings were kind of medium-lowish, basically.
Okay.
Actually lower than what I have them on for BDO. For the most part, when I had it at that rate, things were pretty fine.
Okay.
The one place that they weren't was cutscenes. Like, especially the first cutscene was just ridiculously choppy. The cutscenes after, for some reason, were better, but they would still, like, chop and slow, especially if, like, characters were flying around having combat and stuff.
Yeah.
It was just, like, you would either you get left behind, and then you'd see, like, the end of the battle, or in some cases, you'd see the spell effects of a battle, but the character models wouldn't have loaded in. So there were some things like that. I thought that the world itself looked pretty good. Like, it's not, like, current generation good, but it feels like it's perfectly adequate. The, like, scenery looks pretty decent, stuff like that. Character models, though, I felt were especially inconsistent, as you mentioned before. Like, some of the major characters looked fine, I guess. But I remember talking to this old man, and his face looked like it was, like, they just plastered on a, like, skin over it. And it looked like something that belonged on a PS2 game. Like, it looked so bad while he was talking. And he had, like, no expression changes, nothing at all. It was just like his jaw was moving. Almost like a South Park Canadian, right?
Yeah. But then
like,
but then you're right, like, there were main characters, and it's like you see their mouth moving, and their, like, their emotions in their face and stuff. And I was actually like, okay, I could see this.
It's all right.
Decent,
It's all right.
You know?
Yeah. But that was kind of my experience, is that it was between being decent and really bad.
I actually do have something funny to say about specifically the zombies. So, in China, they have a really harsh censorship when it comes to undead.
Yeah.
They cannot show, like, bones whatsoever. And so, like, look, and not to say that it was good, because it was awful. They looked terrible. But, like, they have to go with almost, like, just like an emaciated human, right? Like, they can't show bones sticking out or, like, wounds and stuff like that. They just can't. They're not allowed to.
Yeah,
it's a really strange thing.
My favorite for that is the WoW example.
Yeah.
Where in Skullmance, where there's, like, bones and stuff everywhere in the dungeon, in the Chinese version, there's bread in every spot. Like, they basically just, like, blanket took all the bone things and put bread in the place.
Yeah.
And I just think, like, that would give that dungeon a completely different feel. It's like it's a bakery, not a undead university.
But I mean, there's other things they could have done. Like, maybe they do have censorship, they can't show wounds and bones and things like that, but make them really, like, wrinkly, as if, like, you know, they have been kind of decayed.
They
a
look
bit,
way
for
too
example.
smooth. You're right.
Like, well, I'm just saying, like, there's no texture.
Yeah.
Right? That if you can't show undead in a certain way, you can get a little more creative and show, okay, well, like, their skin is almost completely wrinkled, like it's been underwater for 100 years or something like that. But there's no texture. It's just a smooth, like, it feels like a character model where you're waiting for the textures to load in and they just haven't yet.
I know.
Yeah. Like, and you can easily do undead that don't need to show bones or wounds.
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking, like, Resident Evil series, the Regenerators. They aren't showing any bones, they aren't showing any wounds because they regenerate them. But they're still pretty creepy looking, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, the example was more just to indicate the inconsistency.
Yes. Yeah, it
because
definitely
again,
was zero textures compared to some of the other stuff where you're like, okay, there's some textures there, it looks decent.
the most recent thing that I was fighting in the questing was like these corrupted wolves and tigers and stuff, and they looked great, right? Like, all the fur animations and textures looked fantastic. One thing I will say, and I didn't look into the settings enough to see if that was the case, like, way too many spell effects and stuff like that. Like, they're really nice in that they give you, like, a running ability with no stamina pretty early. You get a flying mount pretty early so you can move quickly. But for example, when you get on your flying mount and then sprint, it's like the whole world becomes a wind tunnel for a second.
Yeah.
Like, it's really over the top with a lot of the animation effects.
Yeah.
They all look good, but eventually it just becomes too cluttered.
Yeah.
Right? And it's a similar thing to what Alex said with the UI is quite cluttered.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff on there that didn't feel like it was necessary, and it was hard to determine what was what. Like there were so many just symbols as opposed to like highlighting over it, telling me what it is. Like
I will say this though. Overall, with the inconsistencies and the ability, I guess, to play it on a little bit of a lower setting, like Alex's, I'm sure it was still pretty playable. I'm okay with the graphics. With an MMO, I'm a little bit more forgiving. I don't expect it to be the top end graphics because there's a lot to load, there's a lot of players, and it's absolutely not the worst I've seen.
No. Definitely not.
I think for me, it's kind of like I'm used to sort of the Korean, Japanese, and Chinese MMOs having much better looking graphics than most Western MMOs. Like, that is almost one of the features. And this one, in that sense, isn't that impressive to me.
Mm-hmm. All right, so what do you guys want to talk about next then?
I mean, I guess we can talk about kind of like the questing system, since that's what you're going to experience from like the tutorial on.
Questing, story, I mean, they're both
interchangeable.
Kind of interchangeable if you want to talk about them both at the same time.
Sure.
I'll start it off.
Okay.
The story, way too much of it.
Yeah. A lot of exposition.
Lot of exposition. I don't know if that'll change later on, keeping in mind we've all played maybe half a dozen hours. This is very much an early first opinions.
Yeah.
So maybe after you get more settled into the world and out proper, it tones down. But especially like as the first experience a player has, it does kind of grind the pacing down to a halt with how much exposition and how many times a quest is a quest giver 6 feet away that tells you to go talk to another person 6 feet away to get more exposition and more cutscenes. And there's times where I'll fight like 3 mobs and then get 3 quests worth of just exposition.
Speaking of that as well, I found that this has got to be the most linear MMO I've ever played. Like, it was like almost, I would say 99% of what I played was a single quest, going to a single quest, going to a single quest. There was only 2 parts where I even remember getting more than 1 quest, and it was very basic. It was like, okay, collect 3 of these and kill 3 of these. And it was like, okay, that's great, but like I didn't feel any kind of open world to it. It was still just like you're going straight to that area, doing the 3 mobs and the 3 collections, and then single line, and then I went single line to the next area, and I didn't feel any like circling back around to an area either.
No, and anytime you got a side mission, it was generally to go to the same place you were going to for that main mission.
Yeah, which, okay, I understand at the beginning, but it just feels like after 6 hours, and I'm still getting that, that's way too long for like the tutorial period, the teaching you how to follow one area to another. Like, it didn't feel like I had the same kind of exploration aspect that I get in a lot of other MMOs, right? Like, it's an MMO. You're supposed to kind of go around and find the little corners to see if you can find like an enemy out of the ordinary, or like a treasure chest or something.
Speaking of exploration, and I don't know if you can like include this in it, or maybe it's kind of indirect, but like part of exploration or questing or fighting in MMOs to me is loot, and nothing is dropping in this game.
No.
Everything,
the only thing was from questing.
Everything I got was from questing, and the only time that a mob had any drops was if it was a quest item that I had to get, and then I would go and take it to the quest giver. Where's that feeling of excitement when something drops, something new or an upgrade right? Like, again, maybe that changes later, and this game just has like the longest tutorial in MMO history.
I feel like the quest design was not well thought out. Because, like, okay, there was one part, and I think both of you would have gotten there because you're a little bit higher level than me, but like, you go to almost like a library, right? And they tell you to grab a book. And then when you grab that one book, it tells you to grab another book. And then when you grab that second book, it grabs you to the third. Like, why wouldn't they just do something like, okay, there's 3 books in the room, get all 3 books. And then you can kind of like, oh, okay, I see this book over up here, and I see this book, okay, down here. Like,
well, the second and third books were on the same platform.
They were on the same platform. Like, it's just poor design.
I don't know if you noticed or tried, but in that library, I wasn't really paying too much attention and was about to run off the side of the ledge.
Yeah.
You can't. Invisible wall. Like,
I mean, I guess that's kind of good.
It is, but it also goes to show that if you take away the graphics of that room,
Yeah.
it's really a square with one little offshoot to get the books,
And that's it.
and like there's really nothing to do in there.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alex, we haven't really given you a chance
Just
to
been
chime
trying.
in here.
Yeah, that like I think you said during the podcast that it kind of felt like a theme park to you, and I'd have to strongly disagree. This feels like being on one of the roller coasters at a theme park, because quite literally you are just going in a straight line on a predetermined path, and occasionally you have to lean out the side and smack something. And that's basically all it is. Like,
Can you imagine smacking something while you're on a roller coaster?
That's a lot of damage. But yeah, basically you are just going from exposition point to exposition point in a line, and occasionally you take like half a minute and you go and kill a couple things.
Yeah.
Like this goes on for hours.
Yeah.
And at the
Well,
sa-
yeah, we played at least 6 hours basically each.
And that's
so-
at the Game Boy, and that's at the gameplay point of it. So first of all, that's not engaging whatsoever. But then we go to the story point, and it's just as bad, because you have them dropping both a lot of story information all at the same time without any sort of like engagement to actually get you interested in it.
Yeah.
And it just has you hop from both place to place, because by the time you get like a couple hours in, you've already been in like 6 different zones.
Yeah.
But you're in those zones for like enough time to basically kill a couple enemies and then
Like
move on.
10 minutes.
Yeah. So you keep going from zone to zone without like any clue, both like what these zones mean, but also how they're connected, because you're always going through like portals and stuff.
Yeah.
So there's no connection to the world whatsoever. You have no idea where you even are in the world or what you're doing. The story's the same. Like, you have so much information about it. Like, you get the basic gist of it, that there's this bad guy group that have attacked this tree.
They're using dark chi to like manipulate people.
Yeah, and like you have an instant betrayal like right at the start, which betrayals really don't matter when it's someone you just met.
Yeah.
Like, a betrayal's a much more impactful thing when you've had a while to sort of get to know that character. When it happens right away, it's like, you can't really care about this guy, because your only memory of him is that he instantly betrayed you.
I will say one thing, like, if you took your time and actually, like, really listened to the exposition, I mean, if you could, it was English at the time, or read through it, it did have some interesting stuff going on, but we already talked about it. It's just too much.
It's too much. It's like too spread out. It's not focused. Like, it's one thing if you have a lot of information, but it's very focused on something. It's not really focused. It's not like doing much to build up an environment, because you're constantly hopping from environment to environment, and it doesn't do anything to build up characters either. Like, by the time you're a couple hours in, you've already met like 50 different characters. I'd assume
If you know any of their names.
Yeah, I'd assume a good chunk of them like are going to be recurring characters that might be important. But because you have such brief meetings, like you don't even know which ones are important characters and which ones aren't. So like they've kind of bungled everything in terms of engagement.
I will say there's one really funny thing that came to mind when I was playing through the questing, and it has to do a little bit with this whole like pointlessness of it, right? So at one point they're like, okay, we need to get here really quick, so we're all going to get on this flying machine, okay? So you all get on this weird flying machine. It's like a wooden dragon. Okay, whatever. It is what it is, right? But like, the one guy's like, oh my god, there's a battle down there. I gotta jump down. And you see him like jump off and he starts flying.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, so you can just fly? Why did we take a vehicle at all if you can just fly? Like, it makes no sense.
That's another thing. That's another thing about their cutscenes. You get to embellish in cutscenes. You get to do some things that you can't really do as characters because of game constraints. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if characters are constantly doing something, like just jumping into the air and basically flying across a map, that needs to be part of the game.
Yeah.
Like, you can't be constantly doing that. You can't have that massive disconnect between what characters can do in the game and what characters can do in cutscenes all the time.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it just makes like the cutscenes seem ridiculous.
Well, then you're watching a movie. Right?
Yeah.
You're not actually really playing a game. You're watching a movie.
I'll cast the spell for you this time.
But I just found it to be very odd because it's like if your character can, or maybe not even your character, but if this person can just fly, right? Why did he not just fly ahead or something like that? He could have said, "Hey, you know what? You can't fly yet. Take this flying machine, but I'm gonna get ahead," right? But instead, he's on there with you, and he's like, "Oh my god, I gotta fly." Anyways, I just thought it was weird.
What character was that?
That was the guy who betrayed you.
Because half of the characters' names I didn't see. Every time they introduced them, it wasn't translated.
No.
It would show, I assume, the name on the screen,
Yeah, it did.
but it was not translated.
Yeah.
And I'll be a little bit more forgiving of the translation because this is a beta, but we talked about this.
Yeah.
The translation is not done.
No.
I mean, at this point, if I was to give the translation a grade, it's incomplete.
Yeah.
There are cutscenes where one person will talk to you in English, and you'll respond silently as you're a silent protagonist, which is also a little jarring. And then that first person will respond in Asian. I don't know if it's Chinese, Japanese, whatever. Is it Chinese?
It's
Sorry.
Mandarin, yeah.
Will respond in Mandarin, and then the next time they talk, it's in English again.
It's off-putting in some cases because you're like you don't know whether you have to pay attention to this subtitle or not until they start talking, and then like as soon as they start talking in Mandarin, you're like, oh no, I gotta actually read it, okay, to follow what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't think it would be too odd if you had like a character that was consistently speaking in Mandarin, because then you could be like, oh, they just haven't finished doing the English
that
voice
character,
acting.
right? Yeah.
But when you have a character that sometimes is speaking in Mandarin and sometimes speaking in English, it does feel very weird. But yeah, that is something that I could see them being like, oh, they're still working on it. It's in the beta, whatever.
Yeah, localization is one of the last things a lot of these groups do, right? Especially since the game is done and it's been in play in China for a while now. But like moving it over here, of course, that's the thing they really got to do is that localization, those translations, right? I guess speaking of that, it really kind of goes with the whole theme of this, but it kind of felt like I couldn't figure out what stage in the beta we were in. You know, like when I think of a game will go through like a technical alpha to kind of make sure certain functions work, and then it goes into almost like the beta phase. Now, beta phase to me is pretty lengthy, right? Closed beta, which this was, can range anywhere from super early on to like game's almost done, and then open beta is really just to test like the online functionality, like the having so many players on the server, etc. Right?
And many MMOs just release in the open beta and then stay that way until the next expansion.
I mean, yeah, plenty of them do, but it just felt like there was so much unfinished here. It was like this didn't feel like it was ready to be in that localization beta at this point. It felt too early, but again, that's the way I felt about it. Maybe
I kind of feel like the game itself is in the beta, but it kind of is in a completed state, but it does kind of feel like it's in almost an alpha state just because it isn't by design a complete game.
Yeah,
like stuff like just the being on rails for so long, like that's something that you would expect more from an alpha, because they'd want to keep you on those sorts of rails.
Well,
so
yeah, and maybe
you
they
only
haven't
see,
decided the side quest areas.
well,
and,
you
like,
only see the
exploration,
completed
right?
stuff, right? And,
Yeah.
and they want to give you a very focused thing. In this case, though, I think that's actually the completed game. I think that the completed game is this on rails experience that goes on for hours and hours and hours, right?
Yeah,
So I think that's kind of the difference there.
sure. Anything you wanted to add to that, Sandra? Or I think maybe that segues into like character development, like leveling, right? Like the difference you felt between level 1 and level 10 or 11 or 9.
Well, honestly, maybe it gets more in depth later, and I would assume it has to be. But from level 1 to 11, it's a linear progression, and it just unlocks new abilities as you go with no actual choice.
I felt that, agreed, I absolutely agree with that. I felt like leveling up meant nothing. Like, I remember actually looking at it because I was beating on a mob, and it was at that point where you were saying, hitting a mob took forever to kill, right? So I was doing that, and I'm like, man, okay, so what's going on with my like power level essentially? How do I measure that, right? And I looked at my stats, and I was like, okay, so this is my stats. I kept it in mind, and I leveled up. And I remember looking at the stats, and there was only one that changed, and it went up by 1 point, like a single point. And when I got new equipment, though, that's when it started to change a lot more, right? Is that power creep? But like, it just felt like leveling up meant nothing. Like there was just nothing there. In fact, I got more abilities from doing. There was a quest to learn abilities, like almost like a tutorial to your class, and that's where I got a bunch of abilities unlocked. But before that, it was like I got the 2 abilities just when I hit like level 2 or level 3 or whatever, right? And that was it.
Yeah, definitely the only time I felt like any sort of power surge was when I started learning like the full combo thing.
Yeah.
Like you started out with basically nothing, but once you actually had like the sword builder ability, so that you could build up the sword attacks pretty frequently, that's when I had like the big boost. But that was like I probably gained it at a certain level, but I didn't feel like anything else from the leveling.
Yeah.
Which maybe it's not a hugely level-based game. Like when I think of BDO, it's also not a hugely level-based game. Like your gear is your big thing. Your gears and your abilities are your big thing there, because you can obviously get better gear and you can empower your skills over time, and you do need to gain levels in order to unlock the next version of skills. But basically, if you have the right gear, you're able to go into like a level 50 zone at level 1 and do just fine. Like the actual levels themselves, other than the unlocking, isn't a huge power increase.
I guess I find it interesting, like, thinking about that, because I know that this is something that World of Warcraft struggled with for a long time, where they wanted the levels to feel meaningful, right?
Yes.
And that's part of why they made the big change not that long ago to bring the level cap from 120 down to 60 again. It was because they wanted each level to feel like you gained something, right? So, and I'm not saying this is the wrong way to go about it, because that's their choice. They can do it however they want. Just like you said, BDO does not progress that way. It progresses based on equipment. It's just interesting that, like, I just did not feel any kind of power difference.
I think that is one thing. Like WoW, especially early versions of WoW, like a level felt very powerful. And in BDO, like your gear and your skill progression do feel very powerful. In this one, beyond just getting the basic set of skills that you get very early on, kind of didn't feel like there was anything at all.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't really feel. And I mean, you know what? Fair enough. When you're on like the on rails stuff, and like every enemy was still trivial to fight.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Nothing really.
When you're at that
causes
point,
problems.
like progression maybe isn't that big of a deal. Like progression definitely becomes a much more important thing when you get to like that end game level.
And you're trying to do like the dungeons and the raids and whatever else exists. Yeah.
But yeah, it does kind of feel like you're not really playing to get stronger as a character at this point.
Yeah.
You're just playing to get through the next part of the roller coaster ride, effectively.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you guys...
I think the only other thing I want to mention, and this kind of goes back a bit to something we talked about early on, was the combat. But it was... I felt like there was no kind of like aggro radius. It didn't feel like any enemies ever attacked me, other than when I hit them.
I think all the enemies up until the point I was were neutral.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't... Like, I had neutral enemies up until those corrupted tigers and wolves in the area that I was in last. Up until that, every enemy was neutral until attacked.
Now, when you... Because I guess maybe I didn't notice that, or maybe because you were 2 levels higher than me, I didn't quite get that far. Did you notice that, like, enemies would actually, like, gather at you and attack you?
Okay. Yeah, when you got to that point, and you saw it, like... That area you go into, those enemies finally have red health bars right away, not the orange that turns to red when you attack them, and they will come at you if you get a certain distance away.
It just felt too long. Like, I don't know. It feels like, especially if you're in a place, what I was garnering from the story was that they were at war, right? It's like, you would think that there would be some more action, some more combat going on there.
Definitely the behavior of both NPCs and enemies does not, like, it's completely disconnected.
It doesn't match the feel.
It's completely disconnected from the story and, like, what's happening, especially when, like, the village is on fire and there's enemies everywhere, and it's like...
They're not even pathing. Some of the enemies are just standing there.
Well, and they're completely neutral. It's like...
Same with the NPCs. You have, like, a guard just standing there with a spear and an undead guy a couple feet away just standing there. And they're both just like, yeah, this place is on fire, whatever.
They're having a staring contest.
Place is on fire, whatever.
Winner commits suicide.
One thing I definitely noticed about being a caster that maybe was a bit different from Melee is that since there's no tab targeting, like, you have almost no aim. Like,
you have to camera it.
You fire something, and if you kill something with that firing thing, and you're still like in your sort of auto attack loot, your next bolt's just going to go off and hit another enemy. So I was just constantly getting like all sorts of aggro from enemies that were off to the side but between me and my target, or enemies that were beyond it after I killed something. And it was just like a constant deluge of pulling way too many things that I didn't want to. Like, it's really bad for... Like, tab targeting obviously doesn't have that issue. But even when we think of, like, BDO, like, BDO is pretty good for this type of combat. For making it sure, even if you're a caster, you're not gonna aggro a bunch of enemies that are off beyond, and part of the way they do that is that they usually have enemies in sort of like clusters.
Yeah.
So rather than having like a bunch of enemies all spaced out 2 meters between each other, they'll have like a camp of enemies in an area and then another camp a little further away. So it's very hard to actually aggro that next camp unless you're like trying to, of course. But in this case, it was like nearly impossible not to aggro a whole bunch of random enemies that were not what I was trying to attack.
I did not find that issue, but then again, 90% of my combat was melee. So.
Like, I actually had a quest, one of my tutorial training quests, was to kill like these red enemies that would pop up in a grid, and to avoid killing the blue enemies. Like, you remember the Men in Black thing with Will Smith, where he's has to shoot all the aliens, but he ends up shooting the little kid.
Yeah.
It was kind of like that thing, where you're supposed to hit certain enemies and avoid others. It was really hard to do. I think that was the most challenging quest in the game, because it was really hard, even just being really careful to try and hit those red things. If there was a blue thing off to the side in between, it was going to hit the blue thing instead. It's not great at all.
Yeah, I think that's about what I can say about the game. Like, it definitely has some interesting themes, some interesting like locales, but it feels so disconnected. There are so many inconsistencies with the game, and it is exactly how Alex says. It is not just theme park; it is roller coaster. It is straight line drive from one area to another.
All right. Well, if you guys have covered all the topics you want to touch on,
yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, let's move on to. Do you continue after the first opinion? In this state, no. However, with an MMO, I know that there are going to be constant updates. There's going to be, slowly progressing towards something. So you know what? When they do an actual release of the game and like their localization and all that kind of stuff is done, I would give it another shot just to see what kinds of changes they've made. But yeah, as of right now, from exactly what we've seen, no, I would not play.
I think I would have to look up some stuff from other people who played it a lot longer to see is it gonna like open up in an hour or two from where I am? Is it gonna be another 20 or 30 hours of being on this roller coaster? Because if I don't want to be on this, it's very boring. It's not engaging. It's there's no challenge whatsoever.
No.
There's no like exploration. You're basically just going through chat box, which is too much information that you can't even really enjoy anything from it. So it's basically doing everything wrong in terms of being engaging from that standpoint. And it does feel like the game's really not going to start until you finally get a bit of freedom to do something else. So if it's not anytime soon, no, I don't think I'll ever touch the game again. If it were pretty close to where I am, that you can actually start feeling like an MMO, maybe. Like, again, I feel like there's better games that do this precisely better, like BDO. But like, as I get finished done things with BDO, I could see if I was having a craving for that, this would probably be like the second in line for that type of MMO. So I could see maybe doing
I think really the thing that benefits this is that it is an MMO and we expect kind of constant updates, right?
And it is pretty decent. Like, it is decent enough. It's just, it doesn't really stand out as anything impressive in any way either.
Okay, what about you, Sandra?
I'd say yes.
Okay.
And there is a few factors. One being it is an MMO and it is the beta. So there is a lot that could still be improved.
Yeah.
And there must be a reason that it is like the most played MMO in China. Right?
Yeah.
Like Alex said, it does everything fine. Like, there's no point in the game where I'm like, this is terrible, this is unplayable. It's an example of an MMO that came out and just did everything fine.
Yeah. It's very mediocre.
And the main reason that I would say yes is actually because of the payment model.
Mm-hmm.
If I got this far because I bought the game, right, which, you know, people who are in the beta primarily, who are not influencers, got the beta because they pre-ordered it. With no monthly fee, I could easily come back in a month when they've made some improvements to check it out.
Yeah.
If I had to pay every time, like for a monthly subscription to check it out, then no, I probably wouldn't give it that shot. That being said, I can't see it being somebody's primary MMO.
Yeah.
Right? I can see if you are a WoW player or a Final Fantasy player or even a Guild Wars player and you're at the end game, you're spinning your wheels, and you just need something to take a break from it. This one, with that payment model, even if it is linear, would just be a decent little reprieve from that. Just, okay, I'm going to go in, and even if it is a roller coaster ride, let's ride that roller coaster for a little bit before we move on, or between playing other things.
Sure.
So in that capacity, yes, but as my main hardcore MMO, I can't see it.
Yeah. There was one other thing I wanted to speak about, at least a little bit, was the store, because that is something that's very important to players, and I think a lot of players are very wary about MMOs in general. Really, it's even Western MMOs nowadays is the store and the monetization, because. Like, we talked about WoW and BDO quite a bit, but they're probably two of the most infamous for it, because both of them have sort of that ability to turn real money into in-game money quite easily. WoW with the token, and BDO, you're able to buy things on the store and then sell them on their auction house. So this game, as far as I understand, there's items that you get from the paid store are bound to you, so you can't sell them. So you can't turn them into in-game currency to buy gears and stats and stuff. There's nothing in the store that has stat bonuses. It's
all cosmetic, right?
It's all cosmetics from what I could see. So costumes, there was some housing cosmetics, I think. Mounts, maybe pets. I forget if I saw any pets. But it was all, and hairstyles. So there were some hairstyles, some, and I saw a blonde and a pink hair, for example, and that was one of the things with the player customization. It was all brown or black hair, basically. So, but there is the option to get white or silver, blonde and pink hair, at least, from what I could see in the store. So you do have cosmetic options there. That did seem to be the only thing they have, and some services being able to change your gender or your initial character appearance, stuff like that, were services too. I think there were some other ones there, but it did seem like the store is purely cosmetic with no way of making actual in-game money.
So nothing to impact the game itself.
Yeah, which is, I think, to a lot of people very important, especially knowing this is a buy-to-play game that doesn't have a sub or anything. So the cosmetic store is going to be their main form of income. But they aren't basically impacting the quality of the gameplay itself to do so.
Yeah. I guess I just thought of this, again, just a tiny little thing, but like, riding a sword has got to be the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
Like, that is the best mount I have ever had in a game, is riding a goddamn sword.
That is definitely a interesting first mount to get to. Like, usually you'll start out with a really, really boring mount so that you can get excited for later ones, but in this case, like, start off with a sword. What do you really need?
You're like the Silver Surfer on a bloody blade. Anyways, I think that's about as much as we can really talk about it, unless you have anything else to add there.
No.
All right. Well, I guess how do we close it off? Or how do we want to close it off?
Thanks for watching, guys.
Hey, did you like that video? If you did, be sure to let us know by clicking the like button and leaving a comment. If you want to be first in line for any new content, be sure to subscribe to our channel and then hit up our Facebook page. The link's in the description below to see what's coming up next.